The lights in Proxima Station's medical bay shimmered with the slight fluctuation that indicated the station's day cycle was transitioning to evening. Dr. Kazelviks ran a webbed hand over the smooth gray folds of his cranium, a Zenthorian gesture of completion as he finished updating the morning's patient logs. All medical reports compiled according to Section 439.2 of the Galactic Health and Safety Administration Protocols. He murmured, his four pupils dilating with satisfaction as he surveyed the immaculate medical bay. 3 decades of practicing medicine across the galaxy had taught Kazelviks many things, but one lesson stood: paramount adherence to procedure saved lives. The GHSA manual, all 12,000 pages of it, was not just a guide. It was the difference between life and death in the vast emptiness of space where medical reinforcements could be light years away. Proxima Station served as a crucial medical hub at the intersection of 4 major trade routes. Its strategic location made it the primary emergency response center for hundreds of light years in each direction. The medical bay itself was a marvel of xenobiological engineering, with adaptive physiology chambers capable of accommodating 218 officially recognized sentient species. Kazelviks's assistant, Mioran, approached with a quiet clicking of her mandibles, a sign she was compiling thoughts before speaking. All morning procedures completed and verified. She reported, her translator rendering her native stridulations into the standard galactic tongue. The Arkelian ambassador's appendage regeneration is proceeding at 3.7% above projected recovery curves. Excellent, Kazelviks responded, noting the statistic in his personal log. And the atmospheric calibration in the respiration chambers, adjusted to within 0.02% of GHSA guidelines for all current patients. Mioran replied, her compound eyes reflecting the blue glow of the medical terminals. I've also prepared the quarterly inspection forms for the emergency response drones. They require your verification before the end of the cycle. Kazelviks nodded appreciatively. In Mioran, he had found a medical assistant whose dedication to procedure matched his own. This was not always easy in a galactic community, where many species approached medical practice with what he considered alarming casualness. Humans in particular were notorious for their improvisational approach to emergency medicine, effective perhaps, but chaotic and unpredictable. I see the Voltraxian in Chamber 4 has stabilized, Kazelviks observed, reviewing the life sign monitors. Ensure the atmospheric nitrogen levels remain precisely at 72.8% as specified in Protocol 337.4 for their species. Already verified twice this cycle, Mioran confirmed her efficient response, warming Kazelviks's professional core. The Zenthorian doctor turned his attention to the station's external monitors, which displayed the swirling nebula surrounding their position. Proxima Station had been established here 74 galactic standard years ago, shortly after the Galactic Alliance had formalized its admission procedures. Humans had only been officially recognized for 38 years, one of the newest species to join the interstellar community. Their integration had been problematic. While undeniably intelligent and adaptable, humans displayed a concerning disregard for established protocols. Their medical practices in particular often relied on what they called intuition and improvisation concepts that made Kazelviks's epidermis prickle with discomfort. Mioran, he said, turning away from the viewport, please ensure the emergency response simulation is scheduled for tomorrow. I want to review procedures for multiple casualty scenarios, involving at least 4 distinct physiologies. Scheduling now, Doctor, she confirmed, her appendages tapping at the holographic interface. Kazelviks allowed himself a moment of professional pride. His medical bay ran with the precision of a Chronosian timepiece. Every procedure, documented every treatment, verified every outcome measured against established galactic standards. In his estimation, it was this adherence to protocol that had earned Proxima Station its reputation as one of the safest medical facilities in this quadrant. The doctor was about to begin his midday rounds when the station shuddered. Not dramatically, just enough to make the surgical instruments vibrate in their sterilization fields. Kazalvix froze, his four eyes widening as the station's AI announced in its calm, multitonic voice. Alert: micrometeoroid impact detected in Section 27B. Hull integrity compromised. Emergency protocols initiated. The lights immediately shifted to emergency red, casting the medical bay in an ominous crimson glow. Before Kazalvix could access the emergency communication channel, the alert upgraded. Warning: decompression event in progress. Sectors 27B through 29C are being sealed. Medical emergency protocols activated. Casualty reports incoming. This was not a simulation. Kazalvix moved with practiced efficiency toward the emergency command console, his mind already cycling through the relevant sections of the GHSA manual. Section 1289.7 Emergency Response to Decompression Events. Status report, he demanded of the station AI. Micrometeoroid swarm penetrated exterior shielding at 14:27 station time. Primary hull breach in residential sector 27B. Automated bulkheads deployed. Emergency life support activated. Preliminary casualty estimate: 7 confirmed species identification pending. Kazalvix's inner eyelids flickered, a sign of intense concentration among Xanthorians. Deploy medical emergency drones Alpha through Delta. Initiate triage protocol 14C. Mioran, prepare all adaptive physiology chambers for incoming patients. Deploying drones, the AI confirmed. Estimated arrival at casualty site 4.7 minutes. 4.7 minutes. Kazalvix knew that in decompression events, every second counted. Rapid changes in pressure could cause devastating injuries across multiple physiological systems, with the specific effects varying wildly depending on species. He began calculating which emergency medical teams should be dispatched once the drones had completed initial assessment. The emergency console chimed with an override alert Kazalvix had never seen activated outside of drills. Warning: incoming human with trauma kit. Kazalvix's pupils contracted in alarm. This emergency code had been integrated into the Galactic emergency response protocols only 15 years ago, a controversial addition pushed through by human representatives against considerable resistance. It essentially granted any human with emergency medical training the authority to bypass standard protocols in crisis situations. Belay that code, Kazalvix commanded the system. We must wait for drone assessment before... The medical bay doors hissed open, and Officer Park burst through them, dragging a large battered case behind her. The human's face showed none of the panic Kazalvix would have expected. Instead, she displayed the unsettling calm humans often exhibited in emergencies. 7 casualties incoming. Park announced without preamble, her voice steady, as she began unpacking her trauma kit. 4 Voltraxians, 2 Grenellians and 1 Hyraxian. Decompression injuries with associated trauma. First victims arriving in approximately 90 seconds. Kazalvix blinked rapidly in disbelief. Officer Park, the emergency response drones have not yet completed their assessment. The proper protocol. With respect, Dr. Park interrupted, laying out instruments with practiced efficiency. I was closer to the breach than your drones. I've seen the injuries. We don't have time for preliminary scans. But the GHSA regulations clearly state the Voltraxians were closest to the breach. Park continued, as if Kazalvix hadn't spoken. They've suffered rapid pressure loss with associated freeze damage to their tertiary circulatory systems. The Grenellians were partially shielded, but their sensory organs have begun liquefaction. The Hyraxian has multiple fractures to their exoskeleton, particularly around the respiratory chambers. Mioran had already begun preparing the treatment stations, Kazalvix noted, with mild betrayal. His assistant appeared to be taking the human's assessment at face value, without waiting for official verification. This is highly irregular, Kazalvix protested, though he found himself moving toward the Voltraxian treatment protocols on his console. We cannot simply bypass established... The medical bay doors opened again, and station security personnel rushed in, carrying the first victim, a Voltraxian, whose normally vibrant purple skin had taken on a dangerous gray-blue tinge. Pressure Chamber 1. Park directed without hesitation, pointing to the treatment pod farthest from the door. They need immediate vascular support and thermal regeneration. To Kozelvik's further shock, the security team obeyed without question, moving with urgency to the designated chamber. That chamber needs to be calibrated for Voltraxian physiology. Kozelvik's objected, hurrying to the control panel. The atmospheric pressure must be raised gradually, according to Section 772.3 of the No time, Park said, already moving to the chamber's manual controls. Their tertiary circulatory system is collapsing. We need to stabilize them now and adjust protocols after. Before Kozelvik's could voice further objection, the next casualties arrived, the Grenellians, whose gelatinous sensory organs were indeed showing alarming signs of cellular breakdown. Mioran, Park called out, "Prepare a neurological stability field for these two. Their sensory cortex is deteriorating rapidly." Kozelvik's watched in mounting distress as his orderly medical bay transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. The human moved with shocking speed, between patients applying treatments that often bore only passing resemblance to GHSA-approved procedures. "You're administering Reguloid 7 without a preliminary allergen assessment," he protested, as Park injected a stabilizing agent into the Hyraxian's fractured respiratory chamber. "Already checked their medical band," Park replied, without looking up. "They're clear for this treatment. Besides, the alternative is respiratory failure within minutes." Commander Trollvax, the station's security chief, entered the medical bay and took position near the wall, observing the proceedings, with his characteristic, inscrutable expression. "Commander," Kozelvik's appealed, "please explain to Officer Park that medical protocols exist for a reason. We cannot simply—" "Dr. Kozelvik's," Trollvax interrupted, his gravelly voice, emanating from somewhere within his armored exoskeleton. "Officer Park is operating under the incoming human with trauma kit protocol, which was ratified by the Galactic Council. I suggest you cooperate with her emergency measures." Kozelvik's felt his professional composure beginning to fracture. These protocols were designed over centuries of combined medical experience across hundreds of species. They cannot simply be discarded at the first sign of— A monitoring alarm cut him off, signaling distress from the Voltraxian patient. Kozelvik's rushed to the console, his medical training overriding his procedural objections. Circulatory collapse imminent," he reported, quickly analyzing the readings. "We need to implement gradual pressure restoration, as outlined in—" Park was already at the chamber, her hands dancing across the manual controls with alarming speed. "Their tertiary system won't survive a gradual approach. We need to shock it back into rhythm." "That directly contradicts Section 772.5, Kozelvik's protested. "The risk of systemic rupture is less than the certainty of circulatory failure," Park finished. She looked up, meeting Kozelvik's 4 eyes with her too. "Doctor, I respect your expertise, but right now, we need to adapt or lose patience. Your choice." Kozelvik's hesitated, caught between his oath to preserve life and his deep conviction that procedural adherence was the safest path. In that moment of indecision, Park applied her treatment, a rapid pressure pulse that, according to everything Kozelvik's knew, should have caused catastrophic damage to the Voltraxian's delicate systems. Instead, the monitor stabilized, showing the unmistakable pattern of restored circulation. "Impossible," Kozelvik's murmured, moving closer to verify the readings personally. "That contradicts established biological response patterns." "Not impossible," Park replied, already moving to the next patient. "Just not documented in your manuals yet. Humans have been treating Voltraxians for decades. We've learned a few things through field experience." Mioran was carefully documenting everything the human did, her compound eyes fixed on Park's movements, with an intensity that suggested she was recording them for posterity. The Grinnellians need osmotic stabilizers, Park called out, gesturing to a cabinet across the room. And not the standard solution, mix it with formula B17 at a 3:1 ratio. That mixture isn't approved for Grinnellian physiology. Kazelvik's objected, though, with noticeably less conviction. It will work, Park assured him, already preparing the injection apparatus. Their sensory liquefaction has a unique chemical signature that responds to the combined formula. I've seen it 6 times before. Against his better judgment, Kazelvik's found himself preparing the solution as directed. The rational part of his mind screamed that this was madness. Procedures existed for a reason, had been refined and tested across countless emergency scenarios. And yet, he could not deny the evidence before him. The Voltraxian's life signs continued to stabilize against all procedural expectations. As Kazelvik's handed the prepared solution to Park, the station's emergency alert system activated again. Critical alert service conduit rupture in maintenance corridor 33F. Rapid decompression in progress. 3 maintenance workers trapped. Automated systems unable to restore pressure. Emergency response drones diverted. Park's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. Location. Adjacent to Medical Bay Section C, the AI responded. Structural integrity compromised. Emergency bulkheads engaged. How long until complete decompression? Park demanded. Estimated 3 minutes until fatal pressure loss, the AI replied with unnerving calm. Commander Trollvax stepped forward. The corridor is sealed. We cannot risk... Hold my coffee, Park interrupted, slapping her communicator and rushing back to her trauma kit. She pulled out equipment Kazelvik's didn't recognize, compact devices that appeared to be makeshift rather than standard issue. What are you doing? Kazelvik's asked, watching in astonishment as Park assembled what looked like a pressure canister attached to a spray mechanism. Saving lives, she replied, simply checking the seal on the device. Commander, I need access to the maintenance corridor emergency hatch. That would compromise the integrity of this section, Trollvax objected. The safety protocols clearly. 3 lives against theoretical risk. Park countered, already moving toward the auxiliary exit. I've got pressure foam that can seal the breach temporarily. We can get them out before total decompression. Absolutely not, Kazelvik's interjected, moving to block her path. The GHSA manual explicitly prohibits entering areas undergoing active decompression. Section 413.9 clearly. Dr. Park said, her voice suddenly gentle but firm. I understand your concern for procedure. But right now, there are 3 people, 3 of your colleagues, who will die in less than 3 minutes unless we act. Your protocols weren't written for this specific scenario with these specific tools and this specific human who knows how to use them. Kazelvik's hesitated, his professional certainty wavering. Doctor. Miaran spoke up, her mandibles clicking rapidly. The statistical likelihood of survival without intervention is 0. Any attempt, even one outside protocol, represents improved odds. The simple logic of her statement cut through Kazelvik's procedural paralysis. He stepped aside. Commander Trollvax, he said, turning to the security chief, under medical authority granted by Section 1122(4), I am temporarily suspending Safety Protocol 413.9 to allow emergency intervention. Trollvax nodded, once then moved to the emergency hatch controls. Sealing medical bay interior doors. Preparing for potential pressure loss. All non-essential personnel evacuate to Section D immediately. Park was already donning an emergency pressure suit with practiced speed. I'll need another set of hands. Someone who can move fast and follow instructions without questions. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Kazelvik stepped forward. I will assist. As Chief Medical Officer, I cannot ask others to take risks I would not. Park's expression registered brief surprise before shifting to approval. Good. Suit up. We have less than 2 minutes now. As Kazelvik's donned his pressure suit, his mind raced through the countless regulations they were violating. And yet a deeper part of him, the part that had first drawn him to medicine, recognized that saving lives sometimes required more than following established procedure. The plan is simple, Park explained, as she checked his suit seals. We enter through the emergency hatch. I deploy the pressure foam to create a temporary barrier around the breach. You help me get the workers into emergency pressure bags. We drag them back here before the foam degrades. Questions? Several hundred, Kozelvics replied dryly, but none that would improve our chances of success. Park grinned a distinctly human expression that Kozelvics had always found somewhat disconcerting. That's the spirit. Ready. Before he could reconsider, Trollvax had opened the emergency hatch. The sudden pressure differential created a strong wind pulling toward the corridor, though the station's emergency systems prevented catastrophic decompression. Park moved through the hatch with surprising grace, Kozelvics following close behind. The corridor beyond was in chaos, emergency lights flashing, alarms blaring, and a visible rent in the outer wall, where a service conduit had ruptured. 3 maintenance workers, 2 Regulans and a Terrazoid, were huddled behind a partial barricade, their emergency breathing apparatus clearly failing. Without hesitation, Park assessed the situation and moved toward the breach. She aimed her device at the damaged section and fired. A expanding foam substance erupted from the canister, spreading across the rupture and hardening almost instantly. Temporary seal established, Park announced through her suit communicator. We have approximately 4 minutes before it degrades. Kozelvics, the emergency bags. Kozelvics moved to the workers deploying the emergency pressure bags Park had thrust into his hands before they entered. These were not standard GHSA equipment. They appeared to be modified from standard issue with additional features Kozelvics didn't recognize. Place them inside seal immediately, Park directed, already helping the first Regulan into position. Kozelvics followed her lead, helping the Terrazoid, whose chitinous breathing apparatus had fractured. The workers' respiratory distress was evident, but Kozelvics was surprised to find controls on the pressure bag that allowed for species-specific atmospheric adjustment. These aren't regulation, he observed as he secured the seal. No, Park agreed, already moving to help the second Regulan. They're better. Standard issue doesn't account for Terrazoid respiratory specifics. I modified these after the incident on Vega Station. Within minutes, all 3 workers were secured in the emergency bags. Park checked the temporary seal, which was already showing signs of degradation. Time to go, she announced, grabbing the guidelines attached to 2 of the bags. Take the Terrazoid. Move quickly, but smoothly. Kozelvics didn't argue. He grasped the lines and began pulling the emergency bag toward the hatch, where Trollvax and a medical team waited. Behind them, the pressure foam made an ominous cracking sound. Seal failing, Park warned, increasing her pace. 30 seconds. They reached the hatch with seconds to spare. As the medical team pulled the workers through to safety, Kozelvics felt the pressure dropping rapidly. He pushed through the hatch, Park right behind him, as Trollvax slammed the emergency controls. The hatch sealed, just as the corridor beyond lost all remaining pressure. Inside the medical bay, Kozelvics removed his helmet, breathing heavily, not from exertion, but from the adrenaline analog coursing through his Xanthorian circulatory system. That was... He began, struggling to find appropriate words. Effective, Park supplied, already moving to help transfer the maintenance workers to proper treatment stations. They'll all live, though the Terrazoid will need specialized respiratory therapy. Kozelvics watched as Park seamlessly integrated back into the ongoing treatment of the original casualties, directing his medical team with a confidence that should have been infuriating, but was somehow reassuring. Commander Trollvax approached, his expression unreadable, as always within his exoskeletal armor. Doctor, I believe you've just experienced firsthand why the incoming human with trauma kit protocol exists. It violates 17 separate sections of the GHSA manual. Kozelvics replied, though without the conviction he would have expressed an hour earlier. And yet, Trollvax observed, we have 10 living patients who, by your own procedural standards, should be dead. Kozelvics couldn't argue with the mathematics of the situation. He joined Park at the monitoring station where she was adjusting the treatment parameters for the Hyraxian. Your methods are, he began, choosing his words carefully, unorthodox. But effective, Park replied without looking up. Sometimes the best response doesn't fit in a manual, no matter how comprehensive. The procedures exist for a reason, Kazelvik's countered, though his tone had lost its edge. They represent centuries of accumulated knowledge. And they're valuable, Park agreed, surprising him. But they're tools, not commandments. In emergency medicine, outcome matters more than process. Mioran approached her datapad, filled with notes. I've documented all non-standard procedures utilized during this emergency. Preliminary results indicate a 97.3% survival rate among all casualties, 22.4% higher than statistical models predicted for standard protocol response. Kazelvik's absorbed this information with equal parts professional satisfaction and procedural discomfort. The statistical anomaly warrants further investigation. It's not an anomaly, Park said, finally looking up from the monitor. It's the human factor. We specialize in controlled chaos. The following hours passed in a blur of activity as the medical team stabilized all patients and transferred them to appropriate recovery units. Kazelvik's found himself working alongside Park with increasing comfort, his procedural objections giving way to clinical pragmatism. By the time the emergency was officially over, the medical bay had returned to a state of relative order, though not with the pristine organization Kazelvik's preferred. Equipment had been repurposed, medication protocols adjusted, and standard procedures modified to meet the specific needs of each patient. All patients stabilized. Mioran reported her mandibles clicking with what Kazelvik's recognized as professional satisfaction. Projected recovery rates exceed standard expectations by a significant margin. Kazelvik's nodded, taking a moment to survey the transformed medical bay. Emergency equipment mingled with standard issue. Park's trauma kit lay open beside a GHSA-approved diagnostic station. Somehow the combination had produced results that defied statistical predictions. I believe, he said carefully, that I may need to reconsider certain aspects of our emergency response protocols. Park smiled, a genuine expression that somehow bridged the vast evolutionary distance between their species. Does this mean you're not going to report all my procedural violations? I will be making a full report, Kazelvik's replied, his tone serious. However, I will be noting that the modifications to standard procedure resulted in significantly improved outcomes. It would be inappropriate to ignore empirical evidence, even when it contradicts established protocol. Commander Trollvax, who had remained in the medical bay throughout the crisis, stepped forward. I believe this is why the Galactic Council insisted on including the incoming human with trauma kit protocol, despite considerable resistance from the GHSA. It's still highly irregular. Kazelvik's insisted, though, with notably less conviction than before. When humans arrive, Trollvax said with what might have been amusement in his modulated voice, the only rule that matters is, don't get in their way. Park laughed, a sound that Kazelvik's had once found disconcerting, but now recognized as a release of tension. We're not that bad. We just believe in adapting to circumstances. Indeed, Kazelvik's acknowledged. A trait that, while occasionally alarming, appears to have measurable benefits in crisis situations. Over the next several days, as the patients recovered and the station returned to normal operations, Kazelvik's found himself reviewing the emergency protocols with new perspective. He even ventured to discuss possible modifications with Park, who proved surprisingly knowledgeable about the underlying rationale for many GHSA procedures. The problem isn't the procedures themselves, she explained, as they shared a meal in the station's communal dining area. Most of them make perfect sense in standard scenarios. It's the rigidity, the inability to adapt when circumstances fall outside predicted parameters. Flexibility introduces unpredictability. Kazelvik's pointed out, his four eyes, blinking in sequence, a Zenthorian expression of contemplation. Predictability ensures consistent outcomes. In theory, Park agreed. But reality is messy. No manual, no matter how comprehensive, can account for every variable. That's where humans excel, improvising when the rulebook fails. A dangerous talent, Kazelvik's observed, but one with apparent utility. 1 week after the Emergency Proxima Station's Administrative Council convened to review the incident, Kazelvics presented his findings, including the statistical anomalies in patient survival rates and recovery trajectories. Based on the evidence, he concluded, standing before the assembled council members, "I am recommending that Proxima Station formally incorporate the incoming human with trauma kit protocol into our primary emergency response framework, rather than maintaining it as a secondary override system." The announcement caused a ripple of surprise among the council members. Chief Administrator Vox, a Regulan, known for his conservative approach to station management, leaned forward. "Dr. Kazelvics, your reputation for procedural adherence is well established. This recommendation represents a significant departure from your previous position." "Evidence must guide practice," Kazelvics replied simply. "The recent emergency demonstrated the efficacy of controlled adaptive response in crisis situations. To ignore empirical results would be professionally irresponsible." The council voted unanimously to adopt his recommendation. By the end of the day, incoming human with trauma kit had been elevated to primary protocol status in the station's emergency response framework. Park found him in the medical bay that evening, reviewing patient recovery data. "I heard the news," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Congratulations on embracing chaos." "Controlled adaptation," Kazelvics corrected, though without irritation. "And only in appropriate circumstances." "Of course," Park agreed with a smile. "I wouldn't expect a Xanthorian to dive headfirst into disorder." "Indeed not," Kazelvics affirmed. "However, I have been considering organizing a seminar on emergency response. Perhaps Controlled Chaos in Emergency Medicine would be an appropriate title." Park's eyebrows rose in surprise, a distinctly human expression of astonishment. "You're going to teach others to break protocol?" "To adapt protocol," Kazelvics clarified, "within appropriate parameters, with emphasis on outcome-focused modifications rather than procedural abandonment." "Progress," Park declared with evident satisfaction. "Next, you'll be improvising your own emergency techniques." "Unlikely," Kazelvics replied dryly. "But I have scheduled time to review your modifications to the standard emergency pressure bags. The pterozoid respiratory adaptations show particular promise." As Park left the medical bay, Kazelvics returned to his console, opening a file he had been composing over the past week: Procedural Adaptation in Multi-Species Emergency Response. It represented a significant departure from his previous medical philosophy, but one supported by undeniable evidence. The following month, the Galactic Health and Safety Administration dispatched a review committee to evaluate the incident at Proxima Station. After extensive analysis, they incorporated modified versions of several emergency techniques used during the crisis into the official manual. The incoming human with trauma kit protocol was formally recognized as a standard emergency code across all GHSA-affiliated stations. When asked about the changes, Kazelvics responded with, what for a Xanthorian constituted philosophical acceptance. "Procedures exist to serve outcomes, not the reverse. Even the most comprehensive manual cannot substitute for adaptive intelligence in crisis situations." Park, overhearing his statement, smiled and added the human perspective. "Who needs procedure when you can save lives?" Kazelvics's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, the closest a Xanthorian could come to rolling their eyes. "The procedure matters, Officer Park, but perhaps not as much as I once believed." The two stood together in the newly reorganized medical bay, where GHSA-approved equipment now coexisted with human-modified tools. Different approaches united by a common purpose: the preservation of life in all its diverse forms. As Proxima Station continued its orbit around the distant star, the medical bay's emergency protocols displayed a new primary directive, encoded into the station's core systems. In case of catastrophic emergency, deploy drones, alert medical staff, and if available, call for the human with the trauma kit.